please feel free to obviously take a little break here. I know we've gone straight through, but we want to keep moving with our program. So first of all, I want to welcome everybody to the third panel of our 3 panels on innovation. My name is Nancy Grden. I serve as the president and CEO for the Hampton Roads Executive Roundtable, and I'm going to be the facilitator today for our third panel around Seaport, America's most modern gateway. And I was reflecting on this, even though we are the third of the 3 innovation panels, I would actually argue that we should be and have been and will be first for many reasons. Water is just so preeminent as a foundation and as a source of innovation for the Hampton Roads area, obviously the mega region and the Commonwealth of Virginia. Just a really quick little story. Several years ago, right before the pandemic, there was a group of us, very small, who were trying to learn how other regions really did economic development, growth, and in talent, and what have you. And so Indianapolis had quite a great reputation about what they do and how they have built an engine around doing all the things that I just said. And so we sat there, we were in downtown Indianapolis looking out at the streetscape, and they were going on about what they did and how they did it and what was happening and all the great things and on and on. Finally, the one guy says to us, "Why in the world are you people here? You have water." And it was just such a funny thing to really reflect on that. And so I think in many ways our region in particular is fortunate to have an incredibly unique array of assets and opportunities that truly emanate from the water. It's the geography, it's obviously the defense, having the largest Navy base in the world, having shipbuilding repair indices, offshore wind, some amazing federal assets we've talked today like NASA and JLab. All of this means we are a truly unique area. But one other reason we're a truly unique area is our port. And so we are fortunate today to have an opportunity to hear more about the Port of Virginia. And I'm going to introduce Stephen Edwards, even though he's already introduced himself in the Q&A, but I'll be happy to more formally do it. And then we have a panel discussion following his overall presentation about how the port really works with industrial partners to grow the economy here in the Commonwealth and also in the mega region. So I'm going to start by introducing Stephen. As many of you know, he is the CEO and Executive Director of the Port of Virginia. And just to really put a parameter on it, he directs and manages the operations of Virginia's marine and inland terminal facilities through the Virginia International Terminals, LLC, the port's private terminal operating company, including Virginia International Gateway, Newport News Marine Terminal, Norfolk International Terminals, Portsmouth Marine Terminal, Richmond Marine Terminal, and the Virginia Inland Port. Important message on collaboration and partnership, I might add. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce Stephen to bring on the panel, or the presentation section of our panel.
Thank you, Nancy. Yep. So good afternoon. I'll just address one small item, which is you might know the port's shut today. And of course, as you may well know, there's a collective bargaining issue going on in our industry presently. So if you're any port operator from Maine through Texas, unfortunately, you had to shut your gates last night, and we will reopen them when collective bargaining is finished, whenever that may be, but it's multi-employer collective bargaining, so my phone is not red hot because I'm not part of the negotiating committee, so I'm not here to talk about that. I want to talk about bigger, greater things, about how we create economic development in Virginia and how we create economic development with good partners like the Matan Group and the Lovett Group. So I think what I hope to do is take you through a quick presentation, and I'm going to start with a video to wake everybody up to say, this is, I think, what the spaceport team just did, which is the one thing we have to do in this region is tell our story. So what we try to do with a port is go out and tell our story, and this video is how we unabashedly pitch ourselves, but then I hope to come back to a few items as well. So hopefully this video will run, and I'm going to trust the next click. that's our story. I hope to put a little bit more flavour on it in the next 5 or 10 minutes, and then what I'm hoping is that everybody here then becomes a disciple and goes to market. So if I go quickly forward, what you'll see here is really 10 points to talk about. A big gateway investment program under our watch, high safety standards, how are we trying to drive our safety, what are we doing with that water, how do we make it better, how do we make ourselves sustainable, how do we get to net zero, how do we make sure we're efficient, that our workforce is great, that we're part of this bigger, wider region of infrastructure, and how do we get to the market? And of course, what I mean by get to the market is how do we go from when that ship arrives at the sea buoy to your front porch? So I came home last night from a flight, and when I got home, there were 3 packages on our front porch. So I doubt that there's anyone in this room who doesn't get a package delivered to home. And if you get a package delivered to home, then the good chances are it came through a port and it came through one of my co-presenters' facilities, hopefully. But let's go through what we're doing with 1.4 billion. That's what we're investing. And I said to begin with, we want to be safer. So we're trying to make ourselves the safest port in North America. That's the single goal of our management team, is that we'll be the safest and that we will drive our safety down by a 50% improvement in 5 years. And that means we'll go from a 2.26 incident rate to 1.13. These are technical numbers. But the drive here is as we modernize our gateway, we will become safer and safer and safer for the people who work at our gateway. And we will become safer and safer for the people who use the gateway, whoever that may be. So we're determined to do that, and we're on track. And we're on track to drive safety down. At the same time, we're going to drive efficiency up. So we believe that can be done whilst we make all of these other investments. So we mentioned two-way vessel traffic. It's interesting when you think about port stays. The way we make money as a port is when a ship is alongside, we're churning containers on and off of that ship. That's our revenue line. But when a ship leaves the port, up until recently, it had to go out on a one-way system. We had to leave that berth idle and wait for a one-way system to come back. Same exists in New York or Savannah. With the widening and deepening program, we can now do two-way traffic, and that reduces those port stays by about 15%. We're powered by clean energy. We're the only port on the East Coast that is powered by clean energy. So our energy is with a power purchase agreement with Dominion. So we take only solar. It will become wind as well as that's developed, and we'll get some nuclear. But essentially, all of our Scope 2 power needs come from clean electric. So as we grow, so does we keep our footprint clean. And we're supporting the offshore wind project that Dominion is building. And I think Pat's in the room who started to build this a little while back. But we are now moving all of these monopiles and other facilities. But as we go through 2025, we're going to have an exciting time of taking all of the components in and out of the port that are going to support that development. We said we'll be net zero by 2040. The blue line is what we said we were going to do. The grey or the yellow is what we've actually done. So that's what we're showing how we're going to drive by 2040 our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions all the way down to zero. And we're going to do that in a pragmatic, commercial, sensible way. We're not going to do it by mandate. We're going to do it by using known equipment that works and will deliver against the job. So if we do it well, this is what we want to see. This is 2020 through 2023 growth. It's going to be a little different with the things that are going on in 2024. But however, that's what we want to see over the course of time, is that as Virginia, we tell our story, we gain the confidence of developers to come to our market, and with that, we get the confidence of 3PLs and beneficial cargo owners to come to our marketplace. We can grow faster, and we can service the trade better because we can give you a better gate turn time product on your trucks. Yesterday was the last day before a known strike event. If you were watching social media yesterday, you'd have seen trucks coming in and out of our facilities in about 31 minutes, and you'd have seen them going through New York in an absolute gridlock situation of about 2 to 2.5 hours to get through as they were trying to pull the last loads out. We can do it much more efficiently. We can do it better. We can move rail quicker, and we can move ships quicker. That's what it's all about. But the biggest investment in the region is this one, is the $5 billion that VDOT has really got going under, and the $3.9 billion that is the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel. And for all of us in this room, particularly for this meeting being Convergence, this is the game changer. We can take the deepest channels, we can build the best port, but if we need that absolute connectivity into the marketplace. And this is, to me, the biggest single economic developer for the region as we connect it all together. So bigger port, bigger road network, and the key to it is getting this tunnel built. So we put it together into into a group and we say, okay, we can have, from the port's perspective, we can go clean, we can have a wider channel, we can build more rail, we can have offshore wind, deepest East Coast channels, deepest ships can come in. We're expanding with our terminals in phase 1 and phase 2. And then VDOT's going to give us wider 68, something that this group, 58 in Suffolk, a wider 64, something this group campaigned for a long time, and the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel expansion. Put all that together, and that becomes this region. And then you think about our position, 75% of the states can be hit from, or the population can be hit from this location in 2 days. So we can dray to Michigan, we can dray to the whole of the Ohio Valley, we can dray further south into North Carolina. And that's where that opportunity comes from. And hopefully, what that does is then attract what our partners on the stage can help us talk about, which is attracting new industrial product, new 3PL expansions. And that creates the product that can service the port, that can grow the entire marketplace. That's just a brief presentation. Thank you very much. And I'll go back to that slide and leave you with what we hope, well, it's not going to go backwards. Yes, it is. There we go. What we hope we're here to talk about with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. That was really very insight. And I think just the fact that you can rattle off so many amazing and quick statistics there is so critical for this whole region and for all the other discussions that were had earlier today. I'd now like to just briefly introduce our other two panelists, and we're going to really move into more of a question and answer session. We have two of the partners that work very closely with the port. The first is Ben Swift. He's the market leader for Lovett Industrial. And the second individual, his name is, JP Matan. He's the principal of leasing with Matan Company. So what I'd like you each to do, maybe to start, is just say a little bit about what your organizations do and your personal background, then we'll get into some of the Q&A. So, Ben, you want to start?
Sure. Thanks for having me. So I work for a company called Lovett Industrial. I'm director based in DC, but cover Virginia North. And what we do is predominantly industrial development. And I'm sure most of you know what that is, but it's really just helping expand the supply chain. And we typically do speculative warehouses in markets across the country from California. Most of our product has been delivered in Texas, and then here on the East Coast. And we deliver buildings ranging from 100,000 feet up to 1 million feet, just really depending on what the market needs are, and are constantly looking to grow into markets just like this that I know we'll talk about. But that's kind of what we do in a nutshell. But we are industrial only and are predominantly developers.
JP Matan here with the Matan Companies. We are a privately held industrial developer out of Washington, D.C. market. Our headquarters is in Frederick, Maryland, which is about 40 miles north of D.C. Our portfolio is about 7 million square feet of existing product. The majority of that is in the DMV area. We have a pipeline of about 2,000 acres and 15 million square feet, and most of that is in Virginia, down 95 out towards the port. So we are a big believer in what is going on in Virginia and the future here, and hope to talk about more of that.
Great. So that would actually be a great question for both. Maybe again start with Ben. Starting with some basics, thinking about Virginia, what really attracted you to Virginia and also here in the mega region RVA 757?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the video Stephen showed earlier couldn't have put it better. A couple years ago, we were trying to identify what's trying to go where the puck was going and not really where it was. What's the next market and region that we see explosive growth? And for all of the reasons that were outlined, especially the port obviously being a massive driver, the transportation infrastructure, the location on the East Coast, I mean, you're basically equidistant up the east and the south. And so as these warehouses get more efficient, and although the demand is growing, folks consolidate into single or multiple campuses in single location, you can basically access the same population areas with half the product as these, with automation and things like that. So all of that combined with the billions of dollars that are going into the infrastructure projects, our main project in the region is 330 acres on 64. And so obviously the tunnel project and the 64 expansion was a huge factor for us, but also a state being so, eager to have development and industrial users and developers come into the market was huge. I mean, that from the state down to the local level, it was clear that there was a lot of momentum and eagerness for that product to get there and be built. And so that was kind of the main driver. And then you go and visit the port, which I'm sure many of you have, but it is an incredible operation they have there. I mean, I've visited both Newark, New Jersey, and Savannah, and I mean, it's night and day. It's a huge difference in terms of how efficient it is. So in terms of telling a story, I mean, you go there and you do the tour, and it really does tell the story. And, we think we're just scratching the surface in what this region is and is going to become.
Yeah, I mean, Ben said it pretty much all there. I think when we were in expansion mode, when in and around the DC market, when it was harder and harder to find land, our choices for expansion, we could go west into the Lehigh Valley, go north into the Baltimore markets. But really, we just followed the infrastructure improvements. I mean, not to bash anywhere, but you could drive over from Maryland into Northern Virginia down 95, and you could just see it. It was said recently at an event, you can't fake infrastructure. So you saw the investment from Virginia.
We should pause on that. That's really an important statement right there.
So I mean, what it came down to is the state really was putting their money where their mouth was. They were improving the roads, the infrastructure to attract businesses, to make life a little better for everybody. And we recognized that. Then when you got into the markets, Richmond, Hampton roads, and looked at the fundamentals, the population growth. I mean, 7% in the region since 2020 versus 0.7% in the DMV. I mean, people are moving here. The workforce is here. And so and then the supply and demand factors are all here. So again, it was a pretty easy decision. And then again, from the governor's office to the port, to VDUP, to local economic development, really from day one, it was, how can we help? And really a partnership mentality, and it really is showing in what's happening in Virginia.
Well, it's actually a good segue to my next question. We were going to ask you to compare a little bit about your experience in other states. Like, what are some of the differences that you point out that you see trying to develop properties and really partner in other states compared to here? You said, and Ben, let's go ahead and start with you too.
Sure.
Yeah.
As I said earlier, I mean, I've worked in many other states across the country, and especially in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic region. There is a huge difference. You go to any other state, whether it be Jersey, Pennsylvania, and it's, no one's talking about wanting development. No one's talking about wanting growth. Everyone's just, you feel like you're having to force it through, and, no one wants to help. And so it's, which, not to bash those states specifically, many other states do the same thing. But it's, and again, to their credit, part of it is their infrastructure from the warehouse side of things, not their true infrastructure, is much more, call it mature and established, and they're much larger. And so, but there's just not that momentum like there is here. And I think, like JP said, from the state level down to the port, I mean, everyone wants the growth. Everyone wants to help you bring your project to fruition. And that it's just not that way in many other states. And, I think a lot of other municipalities elsewhere just take the logistics infrastructure for granted. And they don't realize that that's the reason they get their package in a day or two. It's just people don't recognize how important that is. But I think here that is recognized, and I think is a factor.
Yeah, I again agree with all that. And versus other, there's a unified message in Virginia that really, it's overused, but it open for business. But again, there's this sense of partnership, and there's a unified message, again, from the state level all the way down of what Virginia has to offer. And I think that message broadcasts loud and clear to companies looking to relocate here or expand here. And again, in a lot of other states, you don't have that unified message. You don't have that sense of partnership. And it's really, it's part of the success that Virginia's having, is having that unified message that's broadcast.
Well, maybe just to take that a little further on perception, because this has come up now in several of the panels today. You know, thinking about how Virginia, I'll just start with Virginia overall, how Virginia is perceived to be a logistics center. And maybe, Steve, this is even a question as well for you. You know, how is the Commonwealth perceived? And maybe give a couple of examples to other states. Is there any comparison that you can do there?
I think there's some great comparisons. So will shortly coming up on 4 years in Virginia. I came from Southern Cal, before that New Jersey, and if there's a port in the lower 48, I've touched it. So, I mean, just to answer the earlier question, I would spend 21 months in Southern Cal from the private sector negotiating with the port of Los Angeles. So 21 months where we negotiated together and we didn't talk about economic development. We just talked about what are we going to pay each other. And we settled it in arbitration. So that was really a useless 21 months, wasn't it? We should have gone straight to the arbitrator. But the difference, I think, that we are beginning to get the message through, and I do believe we're really on the cusp of getting the snowball really rolling down the hill, is we had to get alignment, I think, in the state about, and across the economic development, about what industries we can win in. So I think if you go to an economic development, a local economic development, in most locations, the first thing that's on the list of desired industries is advanced manufacturing. That's probably just the first on the list. Everybody says advanced manufacturing. And then some of them know exactly what that means to their city or their region, and some then just say, I want advanced manufacturing, with not knowing where they can win and where they can't win. And I think we've done a really good job of getting VDP, the Commonwealth, the port, the industrial development message through to say, what industries can we win in? And logistics is one of them. There are many other industries we can win in as well, but logistics is clearly one we can win in. And then we have to take our message to market. And it is surprising how many people we have brought into Virginia who said, I had no idea. I had no idea that you were capable of this. I had no idea that you could do this. And it's still, I've been at it 3.5 years, and you still get folk who say, there's a food and beverage importer who just the other week said, I had no idea. And I think the more we get the message out, the better. And of course, the answer to this is because when we look at the competition, and in particular, if we think about competition to the south, if we think about in the port industry, you quite often think about Georgia as a good example. You're up against a very strong competitor. So you have to be capable of saying your message is as good or better than theirs is. And if we ever get complacent and believe we're good, then we will die. So I think our message, Nancy, to answer, has to resonate out there very, very strongly. We do not have New York City on our doorstep to create a massive consumption base. I mean, I'll give you the example of beer, wines, and spirits. It's incredibly difficult to get beer, wines, and spirits to come through our port because we don't consume enough. It's as simple as that, right? I mean, we're not Miami and we're not New York. We are not a consumption center. So you have to really say, where can we win, segment the market, and go strong after that market. And I'm really pleased that logistics as a whole is now getting a much keener focus.
Yeah, I would add VEDP now talks about 3 major industry clusters for the Commonwealth, and logistics is actually pulled out as certainly one. Yeah, your thoughts as well, Ben and CJ. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and just to touch on something Stephen just said, I think logistics obviously is a factor, in an area itself, but for the manufacturing, those manufacturers need a logistics network in place, ideally before they even find a site. I mean, they need their supply. They have their suppliers, their shit. They need that whole infrastructure there, and the infrastructure on the logistics side that we're working to create with the port's help and the state's help and everyone else's help. I think will lead, because again, we do hear even here. Is advanced manufacturing or manufacturing jobs is, and obviously that's understood, but I think logistics is such an important component of not just that, but everyday life that often gets overlooked. And so I just wanted to touch on that. And I will say that, in terms of the Virginia message, I think it is starting to resonate with folks, at least, the investors I talk to, in New York. I think, 2 years ago, and obviously Matan was here well before us, but 2 years ago, when we were just starting to look at sites in Virginia, the investor community is a very big group of follow the leader in many cases. You have that first or second group that takes the chance, and they obviously knock it out of the park and kill it, and then everyone else kind of rushes in. And so I think we're kind of in that first stage here where you have those first movers, and then everyone's going to rush in. And I think we're starting to get a lot more questions on this region from investors, whether it be, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds. I mean, it's truly over the last year or two just really exploded in terms of the message, frankly, from coast to coast.
Wow. Adrienne, when she spoke earlier today about North Carolina, she had an interesting slide about sort of how do you define competitive advantage. And she talked about the fact that you need, number one, you need product, right? You need to have that. You need to have talent. You need to have innovation and infrastructure. You need to have leadership. So as you think about your industries in comparative advantage, where do you think, and messaging, I left out messaging, probably one of the most critical, 5 of them. So as you think about what we should be doing, what would really advance our cause? Is there anyone in particular that you think we should be working on?
On one message?
On yeah.
No, I think being focused on the sectors we're going to win in, and I'll come back to Ben's point earlier, just on, say, on product or industrial space. So 4 years ago, if you talk to a developer about coming to Virginia, the first thing they were was, how am I going to get through investment committee? There are no comparables in this market. I don't know what the price per square foot is. I don't know what I can achieve. There hasn't been any transactions in your market, so there's no activity. And that's why I'm going to invest in Georgia, because I know I can see my revenue line, I can see my development costs. Now we've crossed that bridge. We've got to cross that bridge now where there's been enough transactions, enough development going on in the marketplace. So success builds success, and I think taking that continued message out to the market of what we can achieve, and then to come back to the other points, we have a workforce story. So if you take what the video showed you was a deep harbor, deeper than anywhere else on the East Coast, you link that into a great infrastructure that's being built through HRBT 5864, and you have a workforce on top of that. And we have a first-class workforce with a 1.8 million or 2.1 million, whatever stats we look at, metropolitan area, with a series of veterans that are coming out every single year, creates an opportunity that a lot of regions would die for. If we want to brand ourselves, I'll say the obvious thing. When I moved to Virginia, I asked my wife, what is 757? She told me it was an aeroplane. And by the way, she still has a 908 cell phone. Because these days, I think when we think about the next generation coming forward, we have got to say, what do we want to identify ourselves as? Because I think it's incredibly important. Because we don't have landlines, we have cell phones, and we don't therefore generate these interests. So I think we have got to say, okay, Hampton Roads, Norfolk, Portsmouth, Hampton, Williamsburg, what cities are we? But we've got an incredible regional story to take forward, and all of the component parts are beginning to fall into place correctly. But as you said earlier, you had North Carolina, who I do believe brand themselves as Raleigh-Durham. So there we go.
Yeah, I'll add to that with the workforce. Most of a good majority of the companies that are looking in the Hampton Roads market or even Richmond, it's multi-market search. So there's 1B question is, tell me about the workforce. And JLL did a study recently where they ranked available workforce per square foot of industrial space per market. So Hampton Roads market was ranked at the bottom, which was a good thing, meaning we have a workforce that can support 3 times the amount of industrial space that we currently have. That's not the same story in other markets, certainly not in Savannah. We are hearing, not to bash other market ports, but you, Ben, probably know better, but we're hearing that there is a workforce issue in those markets, but we don't have that there. So I think that is a great message that we have to continue to get out to the market.
I actually saw another JLL study recently that talked about regions across the country in terms of the number of graduates coming out of their universities and community colleges compared to the jobs. And our region is overswinging, if you will, on numbers of graduates, but we're not keeping them all. We're exporting them. So that's another really interesting, I think, factor we need to take into consideration. We're not the worst, but we're not the best either. So it's a really important point on talent. Yeah, absolutely. And Ben, anything you'd like to add?
I mean, no, I think it's all been said, but I think, yeah, on the workforce side, you know, I echo everything that's been said, and I think, you know, in terms of beating the Virginia chess, so to speak, I think, you know, the infrastructure can't be understated or overstated. Sorry, it is truly remarkable, and the work that's not only been done in just the last year, but it's going to get done in the next 2 years. And I think you can really quantify that. You can really quantify how much quicker you can get your product or, you know, whatever it may be from one place to another. And just it, you know, and again, I'm not a marketing expert. I don't know the best way to to quantify that, but there are just a lot of advantages that we found in the data that Virginia just is far and above many other places. You know, and I think on the port side of things, I don't think many people realize how much bigger the port can get if it needs to. You know, with the Craney Island, I mean, it's just remarkable. So I think just the educational process around those things, and you know, it's going to do a lot.
Yeah, Stephen, I don't know if you want to comment on that point about the expansion of the port.
I think it's incredibly important. We've got the capability to expand the port significantly. We're going in incremental steps at the moment, which are keeping us well above the expansion curve. And our goal is reasonably simple, which is to grow at double the rate of the rest of the ports. So we're not shy. We're basically said if the CAGR in the industry is X, we're going to be 2X. And there's absolutely no reason when you look at where we are as a port and modernizing that port and taking the advantages we've built with the channels and the capabilities we're building to do that. And to do it, we need industrial products because we can't grow without industrial products, and we can't grow unless beneficial cargo owners, 3PLs, and manufacturers decide to come to the state. So, and the strongest ports have a rich hinterland, and that rich hinterland is of a diverse group of companies. So the key to us is to continue to grow that 58 corridor, the Suffolk up corridor out, and Suffolk has been a wonderful partner to the port. And then the next opportunity is to really grow the peninsula market as you open up the HRBT market, and you see those developments in New Kent and James City that are coming online now or have come online recently. They create great more and more opportunities. And then if you look at the crossroads that is Richmond, and you look at the road network and where it goes from in Richmond, that is another rich opportunity for us as a state. I think a lot has been said about site development, and there's a lot of work about pushing through how we get ready for site development. But I think incremental capacity, we are absolutely determined, to borrow a phrase from one of the ports to the south of us, is that we will keep our capacity 20% ahead of where we believe the market is going, so that we're never in that question mark of can we provide to the opportunity.
So maybe just shifting a little bit from big picture here, global state, and thinking about, at the end of the day, a lot of industrial decisions are local and take local support and local zoning and other changes. Maybe we could ask and talk a little bit about that. And this is really, again, Ben and JP, if you don't mind commenting a little bit on that. As you think about working with communities now and you're thinking about individual projects, what are some of your strategies that you have used to really advance and connect with communities in areas that you want to expand? And maybe either one, it's jump ball, whichever one of you would like to take it first.
Sure, I'll take a stab. So yeah, I think, and it's becoming a much bigger, I would say, hurdle, not only in Virginia and more so elsewhere. But yeah, I mean, there is a lot of local, consternation as it relates to industrial. And I think that stems from a couple things. One being kind of a lack of understanding of what it truly is. I mean, I think they just, the locals and the neighbors, just think trucks and traffic and, and noises and it's funny, you look at the truck traffic, or I guess you could say the trip count from 2 million feet of warehouse compared to 2 Wawas that are 8,000 square feet. The Wawas drive an insane amount more traffic than the 2 million square feet of industrial buildings. And I just think that's, kind of emblematic of how misunderstood, it really is. And, I think there's a lot of education that needs to happen. And I think, another component is, noise, and it's obviously there's noise components with data centers and but it's really not that loud. I mean, you can do your analysis or analysis paralysis, but it's just not that loud. And these buildings have come a long way since, what they used to, I mean, they look really good. I mean, I'm biased, but they look really good. And so I think the other component is just talking to the local stakeholders, the community, your neighbors. I mean, in our James City County project recently, we sat down and we talked to, the folks that led the anti-development Facebook page and all that. And I think they were not confrontational. They were understanding. They just wanted to be heard. They wanted to kind of lay out, hey, this is, we really would like this, that, or the other thing. And, I think we did our best to accommodate what we could. And one example of that is, and again, this is coming with counties and municipalities that are, learning how to deal with the industrial development, learning what it is, learning, how to get it approved. And one component of that was the code around parking meant that we had to have one of our buildings have the truck court, which is obviously the most active part of the building from the truck standpoint during the day, face one of our neighbors. And that obviously is not ideal, and no one really wanted that, but that's what the code said. And so, we worked with the county, we worked with the neighbors, and, we got them to, we had to do a full code amendment and all that, just so we could shift the building around so that all they saw was the front and, much quieter. And so I think, obviously looking at the code from a logistics standpoint is important, so that doesn't have to happen. But I think that just sitting down and talking and educating the community about what it really is, how much tax revenue is truly generated, how little impact there is on schools. I mean, it's the revenue per, I don't know, however you want to quantify it, like impact to local services is astronomical for logistics. And it creates, it also creates a lot of jobs. And so I think it just takes some education that, really doesn't happen in most cases to get localities to really embrace it and realize how, beneficial it is.
Yeah, I echo all of that. And again, I think when dealing with the communities, I think being as open and as transparent as possible from day one is, again, always been our strategy. I do think when people talk about logistics and industrial, they automatically think 1 million square foot bomber, Amazon, thousands of trucks. I mean, we have 1.5 million feet of product in Richmond. We don't have a building over 200,000 feet. Our average tenant's 30 to 50,000 feet. They're regional, national companies that are serving the local population, the population growth, providing services and amenities to the communities that are needed for these communities to continue to grow. So again, I think getting the message out and the transparency is important.
Maybe a follow-up to that, speaking to the audience here, many of us, of course, are in regional and local economic development type roles in the business community. Do you have some advice for us in terms of what we could do as organizations, partners, to kind of communicate the story, open these sort of opportunities, and anything in particular based on your experience that you might suggest? This is sort of an open to everybody question.
Sure, I can start. So I think the biggest thing, when we came to Virginia, obviously the economic development folks, the state folk, I mean the port, and everyone, wanted the project. Everyone was so supportive, but I think something that gets lost in many cases, and a very underappreciated component of the process is the planning staff, the community, the county or city or what have you level, development department who, at the end of the day, I mean, you can have as much momentum and eagerness to get a project done as you want, but they still have to sit down, review, submit comment. I mean, it is a lengthy process, and I think many of those staffs are very, very understaffed significantly. And I think that, for example, in our James City County project has probably cost us 6 to 8 months of approval timing, just because they are so understaffed. They don't have the resources they need, and they are the underappreciated and undergratified folks when it comes to getting these projects across the finish line, because they're the ones that have to make sure all the boxes are checked, I's are dotted, T's are crossed. And so I think that is often overlooked, and I think if that can be incorporated into a lot of strategies for growth, I think, and that, because that's something is very uncommon for folks to focus on. Only the massive cities that have super large planning infrastructure are can churn out approvals relatively quickly. And so that's would be my recommendation, is that obviously the economic development component is important, but so is the planning and approval process, and permitting is usually the longest lead time. I mean, these buildings take 10 to 12 months to build, and it sometimes takes longer to approve.
Yeah.
I'd just add to that, and that's really not a selfish developer attitude saying, just give it to us quicker. Again, these are multi-market tenants that are looking at different markets, and speed to market next to workforce is probably the first question, because again, they're looking at opportunities. They're usually late in the process, in their own processes, so they need space quicker. So again, if we can deliver on a quicker timeline, smart, conscientious, all that, we're not saying abandon that, it would be a real differentiator, another differentiator for Virginia. Fast track programs, those kind of things are things we should all be talking about, thinking about, trying to implement, smartly. But again, it's speed is key.
Yeah, is there any example, maybe in another state or municipality, region, where there is a development process that has gone better, it is more streamlined? Any maybe best practice there you can suggest to us?
Well, and this is a very different market, but I will say in Texas, and again, I think it's an imperfect system for sure, because things do get missed when you push it as fast as they do. But I think they do kind of rank their approvals in terms of, all right, what's going to create the most. They're not putting a single family home in front of our plan set in terms of their review priority, which can happen if it's not messaged accordingly. And I think you can, it's two review cycles. Part of the process is sitting down and doing a page turn, and I think localities' willingness to sit down with us, with our engineers, our architects, is very key, and not a lot of localities are willing to do that. And I think that can cause significant delay. So that, the pre-application process is great. That, I would almost make it a mandatory, in-person meeting with at least the engineers and the planners, just to go through to make sure everyone's in agreement then and there. So it's, because each submittal is review, it's 2 months each time.
Go ahead, Stephen.
I just think all of us have to be very, very conscious that what we're trying to do is attract developers to our market, and they're attracting their limited partners to their developments. So time is money. So they need to make their returns as fast as they can. So the more that process also provides certainty. I mean, whether it's speed or certainty, I think if we're trying to bring investors in, we have to say this: you can be certain you're going to get an answer within a certain amount of time, or that we're going to be quicker to market, so we're more attractive than the others. And then JP's point, we will win more businesses if they know we can get that development done in 12 to 14 months. If we're competing with South Carolina, Georgia, Pennsylvania, who are saying, we will have your building ready in 14 months, we have to be ready in 13 months. And likewise, if they're saying to their limited partners, you can get a return going in 12 months in Pennsylvania, we have to be able to say, we can get a return going in 12 months as well. So all of that is a competitive playing field. I think And therefore, we shouldn't for any moment believe we're a unique situation. We're not. We're in a very competitive, dynamic workplace where speed, sensibly put together, is a critical part.
So literally, would that time to market potentially eclipse an opportunity that has longer term potential, would you say? I mean, literally, that could stop it.
Well, I would say, just to add on quickly, is that I think, tenants are now in a position where the timing of a product coming to market is so unsure and it's unclear. And in so many cases, they've gotten burned that, you really won't get serious tenant activity until, recently it was even past your walls going up. I mean, once your roof's in, then you're going to start getting activity, and that's purely because they know it's real. And, so many times, and call it the beginning of the pandemic, they pre-leased stuff and it was 2 years late, and, they lost X amount of business. So I think truly being able to, you underestimate how important it is to be able to see the product with your eyes and know that it's there and that it's going to be on time. I think, timing is everything. And, obviously is money.
Yeah. Stephen, do you have something?
No, I would say, I think the other thing we can always work harder on, and it doesn't mean to say we're better than others, is when it comes to that, getting the utilities in to get that development up. We can have the walls, we can have the roof, and then we haven't got the power. So I think we can all collectively be conscious of making sure we're all working together as a team so that we don't get those last-minute 911 calls that says, help with this or help with that we've all got that approach going all along the way.
Great. So what would you say is the biggest challenge that you face today as industrial development leaders? Open question. Maybe no challenges.
No, again, the industrial market certainly has been the hot market, certainly now versus office or life sciences. But I think we're sort of at the tail end of construction pricing challenges. The lending market is still not very good. It's getting better, but we've been through a couple years of not a almost a zero lending market. So what that means is there's been no new construction over the last several years. Richmond, I think the Colliers team, their research team has an over-under bet. By the end of 24 or 25, sorry, will the vacancy be less than 1% or less than 2%? So the existing space that's there is being gobbled up. So again, I think there are challenges with construction pricing still, lending, but I think the future near term is very bright. So again, the challenges are our day-to-day development issues and things like that. But I think the bigger picture remains very positive.
Yeah, totally 100% agree. And I think another component is there, and it's minutia in our industry, but a lot of investors are focused on existing product and not, 3 years ago, many more were focused on development. And so, because of that, like JP mentioned, the supply's coming down, construction pricing is coming down, but the numbers look really good. And so I think once that investor, kind of pool shifts where, the acquisitions don't make any sense anymore, then, I think it's going to come like a wave. And I think as the leasing activity increases, as growth increases, I mean, we are lucky that we're positioned, and we're not to bet, but downtown DC office is a pretty tough spot to be in right now. So I think we are lucky there, but yeah, I mean it is just day to day, just getting stuff across the finish line, and yeah.
Stephen, anything? So I'm going to turn over to audience Q&A, but one final question to the panel before we open it up. If you had to give sort of one takeaway message you'd like this audience to walk away with today, what would it be as it relates to what we discussed here about our Port of Virginia and the opportunities? Stephen?
To me, it'd be proud and be aggressive. It's just go out into the market and be bold, because the region has got, the world is there for us. We've just got to go out to the world and go get it, and go tell our story and attract as many businesses as possible. So we should be bold and we should be proud.
Agreed. I would also say I personally want to thank Virginia for welcoming our company to Virginia. And I think, again, the future is really bright. The message is great. there is a lot to be proud of, and there's a lot to be hopeful for. We've got to continue that sense of partnership and working together to get to those goals.
Totally agree, and yep, likewise, everyone from the state to the local level at the port, I mean, they've been fantastic, and couldn't be more appreciative. And I think this is something Stephen said earlier, but don't get complacent. And the momentum is everything. I think if you get one win, that's awesome. Get the second, that's great. Keep going. There's no reason to stop because the amount of growth Virginia could see is frankly, I see more growth potential here than any other state that at least I cover. And that's why I'm spending 90% of my time here rather than other states. And so I just think, push as hard as you can.
Well, that's great. I think we should, I certainly walked away with two things. Number one, the world still thinks they had no idea what we're here, and number one, we need to market it. So I think, once again, we're hearing these messages over and over. We'd like to open up for any questions from the audience. We have an amazing panel here, so if anybody has any questions that they would like to ask, that we are...
Hopefully I have an easy one.
It's hard to say. Oh, there, the Ross.
Stephen, for those of you for those in the room that aren't familiar with the Virginia model, could you maybe touch on what that sort of means in the port industry? And then JP and Ben, I know you all probably interact with other ports. Can you talk about how that's a really great competitive advantage for us?
Sure. So the Virginia model really means that we're a port authority, we're the port operator, we're the terminal operator, we're the developer of the port. And so really what it means is, the way I look at it is, if you go back to the pandemic and you remember 90 ships sitting off Los Angeles and all those headlines regarding problems in the supply chain, the then White House envoy got 64 executives on a call to try and work out which one was going to give ground to help the other one succeed. And for us in the Port of Virginia, that's one gentleman who works for me who's our COO and say, you fix the problem. Because you can control that ecosystem and say, if we're going to take pain in our left pocket, we'll get the reward in the right pocket because we can pull it all together. And our job is to act like a utility, make sure that we're still operating as a business, whatever the challenge, and we can turn the lights on when you walk in the door.
JR has a question.
Thank you, Ann. My name is J.R. Locke. I'm with a company called EdLogix. And Ben sort of answered part of my question in terms of how would you rate Virginia's competitive landscape? And you indicated you felt like we were doing really well. That's why you spend a lot of time here. So the second part of my question kind of evolves around competitive landscape that Steve talked about. And because you've been around so many different ports, I wanted to ask, is there any legislation that you feel like could be changed if our legislators were more progressive as it relates to other states who might be doing better than us because of certain legislation that they've passed that's been more business friendly?
That's a really good question. I would actually say no, but I'll caveat that with, I think there is the opportunity to have legislation in Virginia that would go even further to helping boost the growth. And I don't know what it reads like, what it would look like, but something that would truly give projects that logistics, manufacturing, something that would give it some sort of classification that, hey, this should be focused on, this is a priority project or something along those lines. I will say most other states, they don't have that, but what they do have is, a little bit more, I would say, historic, it's a more mature market. So it's, from an investor standpoint, they're not taking as big of a risk, even though I would argue the opposite. But I think there is legislative opportunities to give Virginia an even bigger advantage. But I wouldn't say that there's anything that Virginia isn't doing at the moment that other states are doing better from a legislative perspective. But I think, there's definitely opportunity there.
Stephen, we talked a little bit earlier, Adrian talked about the Raleigh area and the Research Triangle area. And as far as the proposed I-87, which again, at its best would probably be 15 years or 20 years away, but how do you see that as potentially opening up the marketplace, getting some of the business there that may be going to Charleston and Savannah? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think the answer to that question is where do our hinterlands cross between businesses in North Carolina as a whole? So typically somewhere between Greensboro and Charlotte, you cross over as to whether you're going to come south or whether you're going to come through here. So better connectivity, and if you look at the amount of developments on mega sites that we all know that North Carolina's had a series of wins in that region. So connectivity on that is an important connectivity for us as a whole. I think goal 1 was the 58 expansion because that opens up the 58 to 95 corridor. Goal 2 would be let's talk about 87. I think we can all acknowledge 87 is going to take some time and it's going to be a stretch given we've got to get 2 states to agree. Who's going to be the beneficiary of this? Is it the businesses in the Greensboro area or is it going to be the Port of Virginia? And that's a debate that is going to take time. But clearly, for in the port, goal 1, let Virginia win. Goal 2, well, maybe northern North Carolina, and we're just as happy, right? So in some sense, wearing a sheer port hat is, make sure that if we're not going to win, that they win.
One comment I could make about I-87, many of you know the Hampton Roads Transportation Planning Commission. Basically, they have to put together, it sounds far off, but it's not, the 2050 Transportation Strategic Plan. And you literally need placeholders for these kinds of projects to even be considered for funding, whether they're funded. And so both of these that Stephen just mentioned, 58 and 87, are being worked on to be in that plan as a baby first step, but in there. So I think there's definitely a lot of regional work ahead on that one. Yep.
Nancy, you touched on this a little bit earlier, but regarding building these warehouses in advance, I was in Chicago, Wisconsin recently, and when you drive north on I-94, there's 500,000 square foot, 1 million square foot warehouses going all the way up, going north through Wisconsin. And I was with my cousin at the time who used to be an evil state inspector, and he knew kind of what was going on, and what he said is going on is these are being spec built. They don't have tenants, until maybe sometime after construction started, or maybe after construction's completed. And what I saw was several facilities that probably had 50 docks that were not occupied. But I'm just wondering, is that kind of spec building happening in our region? And is it a possibility? It's probably based on municipalities, but is that happening at all?
I mean, I can speak for us a little bit, but it hasn't been happening, let's say, over the last several years. But again, we are a speculative builder, but our spec builds are, max 200,000 feet. There are developers that have built speculative million footers, but there's not a lot of appetite for it in this region, in this market. I think it's changing. We have obviously the site in Suffolk. We have a site on 64 where we can do multiple million-foot buildings. So we are trying to make that case, to our investors. Again, I think it was said before, I think this market for the equity, or the institutional equity, they haven't quite gotten their hands around it. They're starting to, our partner Rockefeller. So I think it's coming. It's debatable whether it's advisable, whether it's smart. But I think if the building was there, we could find a tenant for it. So it's making the financial case to build it speculative.
Yeah.
And I would just add that I think we've built maybe 5 or 6 speculative million footers in Texas, and we just leased the last one at 1.2 million, single tenant. And so it definitely it keeps you up at night a little bit, but the payoff is pretty great. And to JP's point, I think it is changing here. There's 1 million footer under construction in the state of Virginia, and that's it. And so, but there are multiple million square foot tenants, sniffing around. And to what JP said earlier, these are multi-market, requirements. And so they're looking here, they're looking in Maryland, they're looking in, the Carolinas. And so I do think, and we also have the ability to do at least 1 million footer on our site, and I'm going to do what I can to try and get them to go spec, and I think you put the right amount of contingency in there, and you think I think it'll pay off. But again, it is something that is new to this market specifically that will take some educating from the investor side of things.
Oh, go ahead. Nope. Other questions?
Back here.
Oh, here we go.
Right. Please put in perspective the relevance of the depth of the channel serving the port in terms of the container ships that are on the high seas today and what is coming in the future. Will the depth have that much of importance, and is our port hampered, hindered, or is it insignificant about the controlling depth at the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel that I don't think that will change? And by the way, what is the maximum draft of a ship that can come through the bridge tunnel now?
Yeah, no, it's certainly so the dredging program that we're completing up now takes the harbour to 55 feet mean low water. So what that means is at any point in time, we have 55 feet of water. We're currently 50 feet, and to put it into perspective, New York is 50 feet, Savannah's 47 feet. So that kind of gives you the range. You need about 53 feet of water to go fully laden on one of the ultra-large container ships. So when you're coming through very inbound, if you're particularly coming out of heavy markets like the Mediterranean, you may typically leave behind 7,000 tons that you could otherwise have filled. Or if you're on certain export trades from us where you have a large agricultural load, you'd leave behind that cargo. And we have about a 2-foot tidal range. New York has about a 4 to 5 feet tidal range, so they get away with kind of the 50 feet with a bit more tide. The difference in dredging terms, we're taking up mud. New York would have to blast. Savannah's got a heck of a job to go deeper. So the advantage is the extra payload, which gives that opportunity. And then the other advantage in the harbour as a whole is you can move the scale of the bulk ships that leave the harbour. Now, if you think about it, we're a large coal export facility. We're the largest coal export port in the nation. So the bulkers will be able to go out you'll be able to take the next class of bulker out. And the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel is 55 feet. That is where we are in the harbour. That will be our limit at 55. After 55, we cannot go because we'll start hitting tubes. So, and we don't want to hit a tube. So, 55 feet is the depth.
Stephen, great presentation, by the way. Automation is a big part of what's going on with the strike and the pushback that we have. Could you talk about the importance of automation and where we stand in the Port of Virginia? And if you have a crystal ball, what's going to happen on the strike? And I thought I had to ask.
You had to ask, didn't you? I don't have a crystal ball because I'm not in the room. There are three parties who can put people back to work. One is the employers, one is Labour, and the other one's the president. So, the answer to that is it's going to play out however it plays out, and we'll see it. What I will say at the moment is the entire discussion at the moment is yes, there's a lot of noise, but the current negotiation is all about wages. And I'm sure there will be other language to be discussed, but we're not party to the discussion. We are just like you. We are going to find out at the same speed that you find out. Maybe a phone call quicker, but it could be that the news wires get it before I get it. It's as simple as that, as to find out what's going on. And clearly, it's going to be now a very political position, right? I mean, here we are, 5 weeks out from an election with a national shutdown of ports. So let it play out. Never thought, as I said, last night I left New York, I flew over the port of New York, it was empty. I flew across our port when I came in and we were empty, so there we are.
Isn't that amazing? Question over here?
Hi. I'd like for you to put your respective work in the context of resiliency, with the issues that are confronting Hampton Roads in Norfolk, whether it be real estate development, or whether it be the operation of the ports. So the issue of resiliency, the rising tides, and then with that would come Chesapeake Bay Act, the TMDL requirements. How are these big environmental impacts that are referred to as existential, how are they affecting your respective work in the region? Thank you.
I mean, I'll start. I think in order to maximize what Stephen's doing at the port, we need more industrial ground. We need more warehouse. So I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Baltimore has we have twice the capacity of a port as Baltimore. We have half the warehouse. So we just, again, smart, I'm not asking for it, smart, conscientious growth, but we need more product to support the growth and to support the port. And that's where I see some challenges.
Yeah, no, and to go off that, I will say, I think one of the bigger challenges, obviously, unlike an office building or a big multifamily building, warehouses are mostly, it's mostly site work. And so, and each county has different stormwater regulations, and it can be kind of tough to keep up. And so I think, maybe there's some unified stormwater, because the counties and the cities obviously have every right to, change or add additional requirements. But I think, as long as it's done in a very smart and a very effective way, and, we do need more space. And yes, it is impervious, but there are plenty of ways to make it unimpactful or minorly impactful outside of the site. So I think stormwater and maybe the unified requirements there on that front would be massively helpful in kind of streamlining things. But yeah, it is something that we deal with a lot, especially with warehouses.
And I think if you think through the port, the wake-up call, if anything, within the port industry was actually Superstorm Sandy that hit New York, because that went through the 100-year floodplain. You actually changed the designs in New York from about the 100-year floodplain to the 400-year floodplain at that point. If you think about some of the work we are able to do, the dredging program is a very good example. We're able to take all of that and use it for beach replenishment in Virginia Beach and Norfolk, so you can actually be very proactive in how you bring to bear some of the projects as a whole. But as we build more and more of the infrastructure, and as you think about, let's go through the disaster that happened in Baltimore earlier in the year with the bridge collapse. Myself and Stephen Bridge, who runs VDOT, had to become pretty much overnight experts on what's the bridge resiliency in Virginia. And the good news is, we've got a rising sea base, but at the end of the day, we are a tunnel-based crossing. The Navy put a bunch of requirements on us in the very early days to say we will only be tunnels, and therefore we are much more resilient than a number of other states. And the very fact that VDOT has built its transportation based off a well-managed program means we really are in a good place. And as we manage to swing some of that investment to expansion as opposed to just upkeep, we really have got this opportunity to grow. And I think I said earlier, we should be bold and proud when we go to the market.
Any other questions?
I think we are at time, Nancy.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, thank you all very much for being here, and I want to give really a big thank you to our panel. It's very, very exciting.